Now, whilst the war between Israel and Hamas heads towards 5 months long, we're reporting today on the young Israelis refusing to serve on the grounds of conscience. Now, they are few. Military service is considered something of a rite of passage in Israel. Even before the events of last October, conscientious objectors often stigmatised. But now, at a time of war, those who refuse to serve are accused of national betrayal. Well, for France 24, Andrew Hilliar, who I'm going to be talking to here on set in just a moment, and Mélina Huet spoke to young Israelis who say they're ready to risk prison to uphold their principles.
My name is Sophia Or, I'm 18 years old, and on February 25th I will go to the enlistment center and I will refuse to enlist in the IDF because I refuse to take part in the oppression of the Palestinian people. The Israeli society is very militaristic. Every conversation starts like that. And the education system and the way people grow up here, people grow up to be soldiers. But not enlisting or not finishing your military service is much more common than people think. I mean, only 50% of people in Israel actually finish their military service, although the vast majority of those people don't have any political motivations behind that decision, and very publicly refusing to take part in something that is so integral to the Israeli society and speaking out against what Israel does can turn a lot of people against you. I have people calling me a traitor, a self-hating Jew, people threatening me, many ways, be it injuries, death, rape. Mostly the consequences are social.
I think I was supportive.
You said I was very brave.
Yes, I definitely think so. Like, I don't think it's the ideal move I would have selected for her, but if that's her choice, then, you know, I'm rooting for her. But, like, I'm not very optimistic about this place, so I don't know if it's worth the huge personal cost for her. I'm sorry, yes, but I think the impact is just too little, and this is just too hopeless. So, but it's not because I don't agree with the ideal or with the principle of the thing. It's just a practical consideration. I look at it more from an economics kind of viewpoint. What is the, you know, what do I put in? What do I get out? So, you know, going to protests or whatever, it's like not high input activity. So I would do that even if I think the gain is minuscule. But going to prison for a few months, that's not very minimal input.
My name is Ruben. I'm 20 years old. I was a conscientious objector to the Israeli military, and I sat 4 months in prison for my refusal to enlist. Of course, the prevailing notion is that everyone should serve in the military, well, every Jewish male person. I refused on 4th of September 2022. I show up, I say, I'm not enlisting, put me in prison. And they were incredibly confused. This doesn't really happen. If people don't enlist in the military, they never show up. I showed up and I said, put me in prison. It took a while for them to know what to do with me, but eventually I was brought in front of a commanding officer. The officer listed the charges. He said, well, you're not enlisting, right? And I said, yep. And he said, well, I guess go to prison for a week. I was like, okay. I went to prison. I was in prison for a week. Israeli military prison, not civilian prison. And then once you leave prison, once your sentence ends, you get another letter commanding you to show up 24 hours later to enlist in the military. So I had to show up again and say, I'm not enlisting this time either. And they said, okay, go back to prison. Basically, that song and the dance lasted for about 4 months. I think then I had a slight crisis of faith when, for the first time, I actually saw the IDF do something good, actually protecting people. Very quickly, though, we fell back to the same old rhythm of bombing civilians and occupying and massacring in Gaza. While it was confusing for a moment to see the IDF actually do something that I support, it was a tiny star in an endless night of same old, same old.
Andrew Hilliar and Mélina Huet there, and Andrew joins us here on set, part of the team, of course, who filled that report for us. We just saw in that report, didn't we, Andy, only a minority of people actually refuse their military service on ground of conscience, but 50% of people don't actually perform military service, do they?
Yeah, and you know, the fact that so many people don't carry out their military service might sound surprising, especially in a country where military service has always been a central pillar of national identity. Men are supposed to serve at least 2 years and 8 months. For women, it's at least 2 years. And the Israeli security service law does, however, provide exemptions. The two most known ones are for ultra-Orthodox Jews and Arab Israelis. Together, those two groups make up around 30% of Israel's population. It's the demographics with the highest birth rate in Israel, and their demographic share of the population set to grow over the next few decades. Also exemptions for religious, pregnant and married women. But even, you know, looking beyond these groups, circumventing mandatory enlistment is a growing trend in Israel. Many young Israelis who don't perform their military service can get exemptions on medical grounds for reasons of physical or mental health. And what it means is that the overall enlistment rate has dropped from around 75% to 50% in the last 20 years. That is a worrying trend for the IDF. But again, important to point out that those conscientious objectors make up just a small fraction of the people who don't perform military service.
We're going to talk about another conscientious objector who is not in your report. Back in December, Tal Mitnick became the first refusenik, if you like, to be sentenced to prison after October the 7th. Tell us more about his case.
Yeah, so Tal Mitnick, he's a conscientious objector whose case got quite a lot of media attention, not just in Israel, but around the world. It is actually by chance, because his sentencing, he was the first conscientious objector to be sentenced after October 7th. So there was nothing planned about that. But what it did do is it refocused the debate on conscientious objectors after the Hamas massacre. So back in December, Tal Mitnick sentenced to 30 days in prison for refusing to serve. On Tuesday, earlier this week, he was sentenced to another 30 days in prison for, again, refusing to serve. And what's interesting is that he originally signalled his intention to refuse to serve back in August in an open letter that he wrote with other conscientious objectors. And after October 7th, he didn't change his mind. Now, that's something that, especially in today's climate in Israel, a country on a war footing, can really, have you labelled a traitor. But Tal Mitnick explaining when he spoke to media outlets what drove his decision to refuse to serve. He told media that he didn't believe that war was the way to achieve security. Again, a minority view in what is quite a militaristic society.
And we saw in your report as well Sophia's father saying he supported his daughter's decision, but he didn't know whether actually doing what she's doing is worth it for her in the longer term. I mean, what, though, drives then these young Israelis to do what they're doing, despite the cost?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with Sofia's father, as you mentioned there. He's an interesting case. He himself served in the IDF 35 years ago during the first Intifada, and he did say, as you saw there in that report, he supports his daughter's decision, but if he himself had the opportunity, he wouldn't perform his military service, but not for grounds of conscience. Now, that's because, although he agrees with what she's doing, he believes the personal risks of what she's doing are too great and the results, so the impact of her actions, are too little. Of course, neither Sofia nor Eviatar would agree with that. And what struck our team the most, I think, was that they both believe that serving jail time is absolutely worth it. They believe that it's worth the risk of discrimination too in society, amongst their friends, even when it comes to looking for a job. These are risks that they're prepared to take because they think that if it means they can serve as models who may influence the decision of at least one person, then that makes it worth it, because then that could set off a chain reaction that they say could influence other people to follow suit.
Yeah, good to hear a little bit more about what some Israelis are thinking within their heads as this war continues. Andy, thanks very much. Andrew Hilliar, our reporter there, who jointly filmed that report with Mélina Huet.